Okay guys, welcome back. It is time to put a coat of epoxy primer and then probably 4 coats of a 2K primer. I want to kind of really build it up on there so that I can block it down and see what I have left that I want to fix on the gas pump looking air tank, I guess we'll call it that. I don't know if I had showed you, but I got a quart of paint off of eBay. This is base coat. It's called Emerald Green, and the color looks really close to the Sinclair green. So this is going to work perfect for the green. I already have some white for the front, and I don't know, I might tint the front because it's kind of a pure white. It's actually a GM white, and I might put a couple drops of yellow in it just to give it a little bit of an antique look. Just so that it's not pure, stark, bright white. Just to give it just a little bit of an antique white looking. I think that might look a little better with the green. So I have the MP170 Omni mixing right now, and I have the Summit 2K primer. I have this in the spray booth. I blew it off really good. I took a piece of plywood and a cart and I put it underneath it so now I can roll it around. It was kind of a pain in the ass getting that up there by myself, but I managed to get it up there. That thing's probably as heavy as a regular gas pump is with all the guts inside. But anyways, I'm gonna wipe it down with some wax and grease remover because I guarantee I'll get some black residue off that metal still. So I'm gonna take some wax and grease remover. We'll go out there, wipe that down while this stuff is mixing. Come in here, mix up some epoxy primer. We're going to spray 1 coat over all of it, and then we'll come back with some 2K primer. Even though you guys saw me wipe this down with lacquer thinner from sanding the metal again and stuff like that, there's still black residue on it. Alright, I'm going to wipe the rest of this down. Okay, so all that came off. So if you don't wipe your stuff down and you go to put epoxy primer on it, guess what your primer's sticking to? This crap. It's doing nothing. It's getting a crappy bond because you have a bunch of residue on your parts. So it's always extremely important to wipe your panels down really well and blow them off really good. I don't think a little bit of dust is as big of an issue as, I wouldn't say that this is grease. This is just residue from sanding the metal. From sanding the Bondo, sanding the metal, your sander's on the metal itself. Plus I roughened up the metal a little bit more to give it a little bit more bite for the epoxy primer. Now, if this were a car I were doing and I had that much bare metal, even though that filler I used is recommended for direct to metal, if that was a vehicle that was going to be outside all the time, after I had finished all the fabrication and metal work, I would have done an epoxy primer over the whole cap, over the whole thing, and then I would have done my body work on top of it. But this is never going to see weather. It's always going to be inside. The inside of it's bare metal because there's really no way to get in there and paint it. I'm not too concerned about it. Putting the epoxy primer on now over everything, in my opinion, is going to be just fine. It's going to seal everything off before the 2K primer goes on. Plus, the 2K Summit primer that I use is not a direct to metal primer. They do not recommend putting that over bare metal. I don't know if it's something to do with the chemicals that are in it. Is it something that would maybe cause the metal to rust if you put that 2K primer right on the bare metal? I'm not sure. It just says not to do it. So I never do that. So anytime I do body work, like for a repair on a car or anything like that, if I break through the metal, I always will hit it with a little bit of epoxy primer, and then I'll put my 2K primer over top of it. Now they do sell 2K primers that are direct to metal as well. So if you want to go that route and use those, you can buy that and not have to worry about the epoxy primer. But I think the epoxy primer is a nice way to just kind of seal everything up. I like that 2K primer. I've had really good success with it. I have very minimal shrink back with it. And that's why I just stick with it and keep using it. I've used PPG, I've used Omni, I've used, trying to even think, Kirker, I've used, what was another brand I was using for a while? I can't think of it. But honestly, out of all of them, this Summit seems to shrink the least amount. And what I mean by shrinking is, it all depends on how well you prep your body work. This isn't prepped extremely well, I'm not going to lie to you. It's only 80 grit sanded, but it's 80 grit DA sanded. An 80 grit DA sander is going to be smoother than an 80 grit on a block. When I was blocking the top of that, I ended up going over it with the DA sander afterwards. It'll be, in my opinion, 80 grit on a DA is almost like 180. Usually I won't primer over 80 grit sanding marks, but I'm not too concerned with this. I'm going to be sanding it down and reprimering it again, and I'm going to let it sit, so it should dry out pretty good. The reason why people get a lot of shrink back is they'll take that 2K primer and primer over 36 and 80 grit sanding marks, and basically a 36 or an 80 grit sanding mark is just a deep scratch in the surface. Okay, so what happens with that primer, you'll spray it and it'll look beautiful, nice and flat. You'll sand it down, you'll paint your vehicle. Well, then a couple months later, that stuff shrinks and it falls into those sanding marks. So basically it shrinks into those sanding marks, and now all those sanding marks come up to the surface of your paint job. So in theory, you should really never primer less than 180 grit in my eyes. If you're doing something that's going to be outside in the sun and stuff like that. But for this instance, I think we're going to be just fine, and I am going to reprimer it a second time, so I think we'll be just fine with that. So the epoxy primer's mixed up. Now when I use this as kind of like a sealer, what I do is I put a little bit extra reducer in it, just to thin it out a little bit and to get it to dry a little quicker. That's all we're doing here, is just making the surface completely coated with the epoxy and sealing off the metal from the environment. So that's all we need to do, is get a nice coat on there to just seal everything off and give the 2K primer something to adhere to. This is a 2-to-1 mix, 2 parts epoxy primer, 1 part hardener, and I'm going to put almost 1 part of reducer. Now the funny thing is on the sheet from PPG for this 170 primer, they recommend acetone. I think it was acetone as the reducer. I've used urethane reducer for 25 years probably, and I've been putting this reducer in it for 25 years and never had an issue with it. Plus I've read and I've heard a lot of other people that use urethane reducer in this. I don't know why they would want acetone, but I don't know. Like I said, I've never had a problem. If it's something that you guys are going to use and you want to stick to exactly what they recommend, then go with the acetone. I'm not saying it's right or wrong what I'm doing, but I've never had an issue with it, and that's why I just keep doing it. Because when I first started using this stuff forever ago, the paint company that I was buying it from told me to use a reducer, and that's just what I did. I never even looked at the sheet that came from PPG, because I just went off of what they told me to do, so, and it hasn't failed me. So I guess what they told me was fine. You know, whether or not they knew that you can use reducer, or maybe they didn't know that you were supposed to use acetone. But, or maybe the PPG rep that told them to use reducer, I don't know. But, you know, it never has a problem. It never separates when you mix it. You never see some weird funky separation of the two chemicals or anything like that. So, all right, I'm gonna get this stirred up really good. We're gonna put a coat on this, a coat of this on there, a really good coat, let it sit for 15 minutes, and then we're gonna apply a couple good coats of the 2K primer over top. So I will be back in a couple minutes. I'm mixing this for a second time because I forgot to put it on there, so it's only mixed for about 5 minutes. I'm letting it mix for another 10 minutes because that stuff likes to settle to the bottom of the can. forgot to take the sticker off the back side of that one access plate that I made. That's all right. Don't worry about it later. Let that dry for a good 15 minutes. Another good thing about putting the epoxy primer over the filler and everything, it kind of soaks in and it gives this, I think this lays a little nicer after the epoxy soaks into the Bondo. So let that dry, we'll come back, we'll get the first coat of 2K primer on. Okay, we're gonna mix up the 2K primer. It is a 4-to-1 mix, 4 parts primer, 1 part hardener, and I'm gonna add 20% reducer. Then we're gonna get the first coat put on. It's been about a good 15 minutes. It's very important to let your products dry before you cover them with another product. Because if you just start layering one on top of the other, you might run into the risk of that first layer you put on, which is that epoxy primer, is you might run into the of it never drying for you and it just being trapped underneath the 2K primer and kind of staying gummy because it didn't have the proper time to set up before you coated over top of it. So I'm going to go ahead and get this mixed up, and I'm going to wait another few minutes, and then we will go and put the first coat of 2K primer on. Clean the tip of this. Okay, I'm gonna put the next couple coats off camera and then we'll come back and take a look at it. It's not looking too bad. There's definitely some pinholes and stuff like that I'll have to address, but that's not a big deal. And then once I sand it down, we'll be able to see how it looks and how much more I need to do to it. So I'll be back in a little bit once I get the next 3 coats on. Okay, it's all primered up. Still wet, obviously, but I put 4 heavy coats on. I actually ran it in a couple places on purpose just to fill in like a little pit or something like that. But all in all, really, it does not look too bad. I'm gonna block sand it down later on this week, maybe even next weekend. I'll let it sit, and then go over it again, fill in any spots I don't like with some body filler, and then re-primer it and see what it looks like. And then hopefully we should be ready for paint. Like I said, it's gonna be green and white. I have to make the base for the cabinet still, which is gonna be made out of wood. And I can show you what I'm gonna use for that real quick. Let's go out there and take a look at how I'm gonna do this. So what my plans are is to use 2 layers of 2x4s laying down flat, so that'll be 3 inches height, total thickness. And then I'm going to band around the outside with this poplar, okay? So this poplar is gonna go like this and form a box around the bottom of the gas pump. So the 2x4s are only 3 inches tall, so they'll come to about here. And then this 1/2 inch layer left over is going to overlap the bottom edge of the metal. And I'll chamfer this outer edge. I'll put a bevel on it, and then I'll paint this all black with automotive paint. I'll primer it and paint it black, and then it can sit right onto this wooden base, and then I have room for the drain to go into the floor. So, all right, guys. Well, that's going to end this video. Going to be working on the 59 later on today. Hopefully I got to run out for a little bit. Then I plan on starting to get the rest of the passenger windows working and lined up, and then probably get the vent in underneath the dashboard. Got the new vent tube sitting right in there that needs to hook up to the defrost underneath the dash. So, all right, guys. Well, I really appreciate you guys watching. There's also going to be a video coming up on this, and I will see you guys later.